The fear that has been making your decisions for you, while you believed you were the one who was deciding. The ego and fear are not separate. They are not operating independently. They are actually a coalition force. Yes, they operate like a coalition. The ego is the force that needs to protect the current version of you. The job is self-continuity, keeping the structure intact, keeping the narrative consistent, keeping the self recognizable and safe. But the ego needs an instrument. This is where its coalition partner comes into play. It needs something that can stop you from moving forward, anything that might genuinely change you. And that instrument is fear. The ego sets the agenda, the fear enforces it. The ego decides what cannot be risked. Fear generates the feeling that makes you obey without questioning. No doubt, like me, there was probably a job in the past or an opportunity that you wanted to apply for, but you didn't. You told yourself you were not ready, you didn't have the right qualifications, the timing wasn't right, the moment was not right, and guess what? That moment never came and you never applied. Maybe there was a conversation you wanted to have with someone, but you didn't have it. The one that needed to happen with someone important to you. The one you kept preparing for and never quite started. You told yourself you were waiting for the right moment. That bringing it up now would make things worse. That they probably wouldn't understand anyway. And the right moment never came there as well. And the conversation never happened. There was a version of your life you wanted. A direction, a path, something that felt true to you. Something that aligned with who you actually are rather than who you decided to become when you were trying to be safe. You were playing it safe. That's what you told yourself. You told yourself it was impractical, unrealistic, that responsible people don't take risks like that. You had obligations, commitments, that maybe later on in life, when the kids are older, when the mortgage has been paid off, when the timing is better, and later kept moving further away. And that version of your life remained an illusion, never manifested into reality. Now I want to tell you about a man whose story I think about often when I think about fear. You've all heard of Jim Carrey, of course you have, the famous Hollywood actor. Jim Carrey's father was a talented, funny man. He could have been a comedian. Well, you know Jim Carrey, the comedian, but you obviously didn't know that his father was also a comedian. He had the gift, he had the ability, he had everything it takes except the willingness to risk it. So instead, he took the safe path. He became an accountant, a secure, responsible, practical decision. He chose a safe option because pursuing what he loved felt too risky. And then he was made redundant. This safe path removed itself anyway. Jim Carrey watched his father lose his secure job. He had sacrificed everything for his family to get this safe, stable job. And it shaped everything Jim Carrey did from that point forward. He has spoken about it directly. He said, you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance at what you do want and what you actually love to do. His father's fear was dressed as responsibility, as practicality, as being a good provider. It never felt like fear. It felt like wisdom. And that is exactly what we are talking about today. This is something which is shaping your life, my life. And here's a question I want you to sit with. In each of those moments, the job, the conversation, that unlived ambition, what were you actually experiencing? Because it didn't feel like fear. As I mentioned, it felt like you were being responsible. It felt like wisdom. It felt like maturity, like being sensible, being realistic. And that feeling, that entirely convincing feeling of being reasonable is the most sophisticated disguise in the whole human operating system. Fear. Not the fear of physical danger, not the fear that makes you step back from the edge of a cliff. The quiet fear, the internal fear that never announces itself as fear. The fear that has been making your decisions for you while you believed you were the one who was deciding. Last episode, we actually talked about the ego, the default dominant force, the force that was always running. And I ended with a question. What is the thing in your life that you have been calling wisdom that might actually be fear? That question is where we begin today, because the ego and fear are not separate. They are not operating independently. They are actually a coalition force. Yes, they operate like a coalition. The ego is the force that needs to protect the current version of you. The job is self-continuity, keeping the structure intact, keeping the narrative consistent, keeping the self recognizable and safe. But the ego needs an instrument. This is where its coalition partner comes into play. It needs something that can stop you from moving forward, anything that might genuinely change you. And that instrument is fear. The ego sets the agenda, the fear enforces it. The ego decides what cannot be risked. Fear generates the feeling that makes you obey without questioning. This is why fear is so difficult to detect, because by the time you experience it, it has already been processed, repackaged and delivered as something entirely different. As caution, as wisdom, as common sense, all dressed around this cloth of responsibility. The raw signal of fear, which is simply this threatens the current structure, never reaches your conscious experience in that form. It arrives disguised. And the disguise is so convincing that most people spend their entire lives obeying a force they never once identified as fear. This is precisely what the fear actually is in the human operating system. It's not primarily a response to physical danger, because that is something totally separate and valid. If you're walking on the road and all of a sudden a lion leaps out in front of you, then obviously you've got to have that feeling of fear and do get into that fight or flight mode. But we're talking about a different kind of fear. And the disguise is so convincing that most people spend their entire lives obeying a force they never once identified as fear. I mean, let me just be clear that there are different kinds of fear. And the one that we're talking about is different to the primary fear that you would experience if you were walking on the road and a lion just leaped out in front of you. Then you get into that fight or flight mode. That is a different kind of a primary response to physical danger. That version of fear, the sharp, immediate response to genuine threat, is healthy. It's the body and the mind working together to protect you from harm. That version of fear has a clear purpose and a clear endpoint. The danger passes, the fear releases. The fear we are diagnosing and discussing is different in kind. This is psychological fear, existential fear, the fear not of physical harm, but of identity disruption, the fear not of death, but of change, the fear not of pain, but of the unknown version of yourself that change might produce. And unlike physical fear, this version has no clear endpoint. Because once the line has disappeared, the body restores back to normality and the fear is finished. Whereas this psychological fear can be continuous and it can actually be ongoing till the day you die. It doesn't resolve when the danger passes, because the danger it is protecting against is not a specific external threat. It is the permanent, ever-present possibility that the life you are living, the identity you have constructed, the version of yourself you have decided on, might need to change. And that possibility never goes away, which means this fear, once installed, runs continuously, quietly in the background, shaping every significant decision you make. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, persistently, and most importantly, convincingly. Here is what makes this so diagnostically important. The person running a fear managed life almost never knows it because they are not experiencing fear as you would associate the feeling of experiencing fear. They are experiencing a whole lot of reasons which sound very rational, which sound very logical, excellent, well constructed, entirely believable reasons for why this is not the right time, why this particular risk is different from other risks, why caution here is genuinely the wisest position. The mind recruited by the fear builds a case. And the case is always convincing because the mind is extraordinarily capable of creating those rational decisions. It can construct an argument for almost any conclusion the fear has already decided upon. The fear decides this must not happen. The mind builds the argument. Here's why it should not happen. And the person just experiences the argument, not the fear. They think they are just being reasonable. What they don't realize is they are just obeying a dominant force inside of them without them realizing. I want to map out exactly how fear disguises itself. Because once you see the disguise or the series of disguises, you will recognize them everywhere in yourself, in the people around you, in entire institutions and cultures. Fear wears many faces, but the most common disguises are the following. The first disguise is that fear is dressed as wisdom. This is the most sophisticated disguise and the hardest to penetrate. When fear presents itself as wisdom, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like discernment. You are not running away from the difficult conversation. You are choosing your battles wisely. You are not avoiding that risk. You are being strategic. You are not staying small. You are being realistic about what is actually achievable. The wisdom disguise is particularly the most effective because it is often partially true. Sometimes caution is genuinely wise. Sometimes waiting is genuinely the best strategic decision, or partially. The diagnostic question, the precise question the human operating system framework gives you is this: who made this decision? Was it the mind thinking clearly, genuinely evaluating the situation, or was it the fear and the mind was recruited afterwards to justify a conclusion that was already made? The difference between genuine wisdom and fear disguised as wisdom is not always visible in the decision itself. It is visible in the pattern of decisions over time. Genuine wisdom produces a portfolio of decisions that includes both bold moves and cautious ones, calibrated to the actual situation. Fear disguised as wisdom produces a pattern. Always cautious, always waiting for the right moment, which never comes. It's the pattern that you have to analyze, which is telling you where the actual decision is coming from. The second disguise is fear dressed as responsibility. This is the disguise that operates most powerfully in family systems, in cultures that value obligation, in people with genuine care for others. You can't take that risk. You have people depending on you. You have family. You have a mortgage to pay. This is stupid to be taking this risk and gambling what you already have: a safe job, roof over your head, and things are going smoothly. Yes, they may be going smoothly and safely, but you're not living your best life. You're living a safe life which you have just compromised with. You're constantly convinced or consistently convinced that you cannot change your direction because it would be a huge disruption for you and your family. You cannot prioritize what you genuinely want. That would be selfish at this moment in time. I want to speak directly to something here. In many of our communities, in the South Asian households, in Middle Eastern families and African households, this disguise is one of the most powerful of all. I've experienced it. Because the obligation is real, the family expectations are real, the cultural weight is real. And I will actually point out a couple of examples I know from my own life experiences where this sort of plays out. It may not happen so much now, probably does, but I remember back when my generation was studying, going to university, there was a lot of parental expectations on children to follow careers that their parents wanted them to pursue. You have to become a doctor, become a lawyer, become an engineer, become an accountant. And many children have sacrificed their own dreams and aspirations to to do courses and follow careers that they never really wanted to pursue. I still know people who have gone into professions where their heart is not in it and never was in it from day one. They had this cultural expectation that they have to follow their father's footsteps, become a doctor, become a pharmacist or an accountant. And they were not really pursuing their own desires and dreams. Maybe they wanted to become a stand-up comedian. They wanted to become an artist, but it wasn't the thing to do at that time. And this is how the fear disguised as wisdom and responsibility steals their dreams and actually becomes a barrier to their dreams and the real life that they wanted to live. But fear has learned to dress in responsibilities, clothing, and this is an exact example of what I am talking about, because responsibility is above criticism. Nobody challenges you for being responsible. Nobody questions the decisions made in the name of obligation. So fear, which cannot survive examination, hides behind this responsibility. So the diagnostic question here is to be honest and it has to be an honest and difficult question, and be honest with yourselves. Would the people you are being responsible for, if they truly understood what you are sacrificing and why, would they want you to make their sacrifice? Or is the responsibility you are citing partly a construction, a story that protects the fear from ever having to be examined? The third disguise, this is where fear is dressed as practicality. Let me mention a name to you, which is not a stranger to the celebrity world. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, when she was a struggling writer, up to a dozen publishers rejected her story, her manuscripts for this wizard story that she was writing, Harry Potter. Each rejection was an invitation for her to be practical, to be realistic, to accept the verdict of all these highly influential, powerful people sitting in their publishing roles, who knew their industry very well, who told her this cannot work, this is not something we can support. This was a reminder to her to stop submitting and do something sensible with your life. She was a single mother living on welfare. The practical decision was obvious to everybody around her. But what she did, she pursued her ambition, she kept submitting. The fear that dressed as practicality told her, they're right, this isn't good enough, you're not going to succeed. Stop exposing yourself to rejection. But she failed to take that on board and didn't obey, which was obviously a good thing for her. And the Harry Potter series became one of the most successful publishing events in history. Everybody knows the success of the books and the subsequent films that followed. This practical advice that was given to her by people who were being practical were not wrong, that this was a risk. What they were wrong about is that they were wrong that the risk was fears to make. They were wrong about the decision which they wanted it to make was based on fear. This she refused to do, and she pursued her ambitions and rejected all forms of this advice dressed as practical advice, but really the basis of it was fear. So let's look at the fourth disguise, fear as consideration for others. I don't want to upset anyone. Now is not a good time for them. They have enough going on, I don't want to add to it. This disguise is particularly common in people who have learnt early that their own needs and voice are not as important as the emotional comfort of other people around them. The consideration is real, the sensitivity is real, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have this consideration and be sensitive to other people's needs. The care we should have for other people is something that we should, take into account, but it has been hijacked by fear inside of us. This fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of the response, and it presents itself as kindness when it actually is avoidance. I've experienced this. One of the first jobs that I got after leaving university was in the insurance industry, and we were selling insurance. And I remember you could have some of the best leads that that these are people that you should be speaking to, but you keep delaying ringing them, you keep delaying speaking to them because you think they must be busy. I don't want to disturb them. Now maybe not the right time for them. But really, looking back now from a different lens, it was just fear, underlying fear of rejection. I don't want to ring them just in case they say no. But reality is that if I had called them, or if anybody else who is in sales makes that call, they will find they were more likely to be successful than not be successful for a definite fact if you don't call them. Yes, you may be rejected if you call them, but you're definitely being rejected when you don't make that call. And this is, again, fear disguised as showing care for other people. Let's bring this back to actual life. Think about the last time you held back from saying something true. Maybe it was in a relationship or in a business meeting, a conversation that really mattered. You had something that you needed to be said. You knew you had to say it. You could feel it, that it's sitting inside of you and it needs to come out, but you didn't say it. What did you tell yourself? Again, the timing's not right. They're already stressed. It probably wouldn't have changed anything anyway. Now run those reasons through the diagnostic tool and the framework which I discussed. Was it that the mind thinking clearly, or was it fear building a case for silence? Because here is what fear sounds like when it is actually working perfectly. It sounds like reason. It sounds like measured consideration for others. It produces his thoughts you would be comfortable sharing with anyone because they are entirely respectable thoughts. Or was that fear building a case for silence? Because here is what fear sounds like when it is working perfectly. It sounds exactly like reason. It sounds measured, considerate, mature. It produces thoughts you would be comfortable sharing with anyone because they are entirely respectable thoughts. That is the disguise working as designed thoughts. Now let's look at something even bigger than that. Think about the version of your life that you have not yet lived. The direction you knew you wanted to take but you didn't take. The things you have been moving towards slowly but hasn't quite sort of helped you get there. Think of the other people, the real life cases I want to share with you, like J.K. Rowling, who did not listen to those different voices of fear disguised as wisdom, responsibility, etc. Many of you know Oprah Winfrey. She was told early on in her career that she was unfit for television news. She could have accepted that verdict. It came from people in the industry who were sitting in positions of authority. They were giving her a professional assessment as industry insider feedback, objective feedback. The fear told her maybe they're right, maybe the world of television isn't for you. Maybe you need to reassess and be realistic as to what you can achieve. But she didn't accept that. And the rest is history. Ed Sheeran slept rough in London for extended periods before his breakthrough. Again, fear dressed as practicality. Every single night, sleeping on the underground was an invitation to go home, get a real proper job, and be realistic and practical. But he stayed. He pursued. These are not superhumans. These are people who just learn sometimes consciously through sheer stubbornness and they were persistent, and they were basically felt that fear and did it anyway. They overcame that fear. And this is the question that you need to ask yourself honestly. How much of where you are right now is where you choose to be? How much of it is the accumulated result of what you avoided? Because here is what a fear-managed life looks like from the outside. It looks entirely reasonable. It looks like a series of sensible decisions made by thoughtful, responsible, realistic people like you. It doesn't look like fear. There isn't a big sign flashing on your head saying that I am managing fear. From the inside, it often feels like frustration without you being able to identify the clear source of that frustration. That feeling, that persistent low-level, sourceless frustration is often the heart trying to communicate what the fear has been suppressing. The heart knows what the fear has been costing. Even when the mind has constructed excellent reasons for every decision, the heart definitely knew that the fear is operating in that human operating system and the entire framework. Let me give you the exact mechanism how this fear actually operates in your human operating system, the framework that we keep outlining and talking about. The fear operates through a 3-stage sequence that happens so quickly that you almost never catch it in real time. Stage 1, a threat is detected. Something presents itself as an opportunity. The operating system scans it instantly, automatically, and he asks one question: does this threaten the current structure? Not is this dangerous physically, but does this require me to change? Does this challenge the narrative? Does this demand something from me that the current version of me is not sure that it can provide? If the answer is yes, fear kicks in. Stage 2, the signal is repackaged. The raw signal, this feels threatening to my current structure, is immediately processed. The mind is recruited, and within moments before the signal has even reached full conscious awareness, it has been repackaged into wisdom, responsibility, and practical advice, or maybe consideration of others has come in. The fear never arrives at your conscious mind as fear. It arrives as a thought, a concern, an argument. Stage 3, the decision is made. The person experiencing a reason rather than the fear then makes that decision. And it's that decision that feels rational, feels measured, feels considered. It is never then examined. This is how the whole pattern just keeps repeating. And the operating system has successfully protected the current structure from the threat of genuine change. And this is what you really need to truly understand. It is not a flaw in your operating system. It is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's the earlier chapters of your own life that this mechanism was necessary. A child in an unpredictable environment where there was a genuine threat learns to stay safe, learns to avoid what has previously caused pain. This mechanism was designed for that environment. But now the situations have changed. Environment has changed. The threats are no longer primarily physical. The unknowns are no longer primarily dangerous. But the mechanism is still running the same program that was installed, or shall I say, programmed from childhood. Applying a threat detection system designed for genuine danger to situations that require growth, risk, and the willingness for change. The fear that was once a survival tool has become a governor. The thing about fear is that when I was growing up, we used to listen to a lot of motivational speakers, read books. Books have been written about fear, and they tell you that feel the fear and do it anyway. Yes, that's true. That's true to a certain point. But fear is a strange paradox, because courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. And all of that is true, yes, but it misses one most important point. You cannot push through a fear you haven't identified. You cannot act despite a fear you are experiencing, as wisdom, because you cannot take a leap you are convinced would be irresponsible. Jim Carrey's father didn't know he was obeying fear. He thought he was being responsible, practical, and sensible. He experienced reasons, not fear. And you cannot overcome what you cannot see. The first work before the courage, before the action, before the leap is recognition. So seeing the fear for what it actually is, not fighting it, not suppressing it, not pretending it isn't there, but naming it accurately. This is fear. This is not wisdom. This is not responsibility. This is not practicality. This is fear, wearing all those different labels, dressed in that particular wrapper, repackaged, because it cannot survive if it came to you unwrapped and written on there that this is fear. This is why naming it is probably the most precise, honest, uncomfortable thing that you can do. The interruption that you can do at this stage to stop it from running your life on autopilot, and to break the power that it has over you, because this disguise that it keeps coming back in the different forms of patterns, you need to recognize that and understand where and how you are being manipulated. And all your life you have been manipulated. This is the tension I want to leave with you today. This is something that you need to go back and reflect upon, about your life. As it currently exists, it contains the accumulated weight of every decision fear made for you. Every conversation not had, every direction not taken, every opportunity not taken was a risk that you avoided. Every version of yourself that got edited out before it could be expressed. That weight is real. And I'm not asking you to dismantle it overnight. I'm asking you to do something more honest than you have perhaps ever done before. I'm asking you to look at the decisions that are in front of you. And right now, the ones sitting in your relationships, in your professional life, in the quiet spaces of your own thinking, and to ask yourself with genuine honesty, which of these are truly based on wisdom? Which of these is fear disguised as wisdom? Because here is what becomes possible when you can answer that question accurately. You don't have to be fearless. Nobody's fearless. The most courageous people in history were not people who felt no fear. They were people who could distinguish between fear and wisdom, who chose not to let fear dictate their decision. J.K. Rowling, I've mentioned to you, Ed Sheeran, Oprah Winfrey, Jim Carrey himself, who didn't follow his father's footsteps to go down the safe route and just take a job because being a stand-up comedian or a movie star will be too risky and irresponsible. The fear will always be there. The question is simply, will you let it decide your life and shape your future? And this is where most people have a blind spot. We have established and highlighted and shown the light on how this fear has been the silence enforcer in your life. The ego, as its coalition partner, has been protecting the structure, has been making you comply and making you produce a life that which today may not be the one that you're happy with. The heart knows this. The heart has always known this. Every time fear one dressed as wisdom, the heart registered the loss. It just accepted it because you made that decision and ordered the body to go ahead and execute that decision. Just quietly, as a kind of knowing that something real has been left behind. That knowing is still there, and it is the most important navigation tool in your entire operating system. More reliable than the mind's reasons. More honest than the fear's disguises. The heart already knows which decisions in your life were wisdom and which ones were based on fear. You just have to be still enough, quiet enough to hear it and truly understand how you've reached this point in your life. Where do I take you next? We've looked at 3 of the 6 forces in depth: the mind, the voice that lies to you, the heart that already knows, the ego that is always operating on default and probably the most loudest, and today the fear, most sophisticated disguise in the human operating system. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about a force that fear has been suppressing, because there is something that fear does that we haven't yet fully named. Fear doesn't just stop you from moving forward, it stops you from feeling things. Specifically, it stops you from feeling what is happening in your own body, because the body knows long before the mind has constructed the reasons, long before the ego has curated the narrative, long before fear has applied its disguise, the body registered the truth. A tightness in the chest, a restlessness inside it, a fatigue that sleep doesn't resolve. These are not random physical events. This is the body speaking, reporting on what the operating system is actually experiencing underneath all the reasons, all the narratives and the disguises and the tricks. In the next episode, I'm going to show you what the body has been trying to tell you, because it has been speaking the whole time. You've just not learned how to hear it. Before I close, one practice for this week. This week, whenever you find yourself using the words, I'm just being realistic, or I'm just being practical, or now is not the right time, just stop for a moment, not to judge the thought, not to dismiss the concern, but just to ask this honest question: is this the mind, or is this the fear thinking for me? Then you will find maybe you are able to make an informed decision differently to the way you have been operating up until now.